Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to a daily dose of the Bible. We are reading through Mark right now. This is Mark chapter 8. Jesus is way into his ministry already in Mark chapter 8. Mark's a man of few words, but he tells about some of the greatest miracles, that he was firsthand there, right there with Jesus and the other disciples. So this is his story of what he saw with Jesus, his story of his life walking literally physically next to Jesus, whereas we can walk with Jesus too. He's not so much physical, but spiritually he's a very powerful partner in life. So chapter 8 starts with Jesus feeding 4,000. He's already fed 5,000. About this time, another large crowd had gathered, and the people ran out of food again. Jesus called the disciples and told them, "I feel sorry for these people. They have been here with me for 3 days, and they have nothing left to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will faint along the way, for some of them have come a long distance." His disciples replied, "How are we supposed to find enough food to feed them out here in the wilderness?" Jesus asked, How much bread do you have?" 7 loaves, they replied. So Jesus told the people to sit down on the ground, and he broke the 7 loaves, thanked God for them, and broke them into pieces. He gave them to his disciples, who distributed the bread to the crowd. A few small fish were found too, and Jesus also blessed these and told the disciples to distribute them. They ate as much as they wanted. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 large baskets of leftover food, and there were about 4,000 people in the crowd that day. Jesus sent them home after they had eaten. Immediately after this, he got into a boat with his disciples, and crossed over to the region of Dalmanutha. So here he's feeding 4,000, and that's probably 4,000 men. I guess it doesn't say, but in the other version it was 5,000 men. So that would include their families and everything too, 15, 20,000 people. And this was probably about the same size of a crowd. It doesn't really matter, 7 loaves and a few fish. And Jesus blesses them. He gives them to the disciples and says, "Here, feed the people." One thing about the stories about feeding the 5,000, one time my pastor had given a sermon on that, and he said, it's not, Jesus didn't take the bread and the fish and do it himself, He had the disciples distribute the food. That's like us. We're the disciples, and we should be distributing the food. He can do it. I mean, there's nothing he can't do. He won't work without us helping. He needs and prefers to work through our hearts to reach other people. So we need to do our part and help feed those 4,000 people too. It also shows how much Jesus cares about, just basic physical needs. It's their own problem. They shouldn't have, the people are foolish for coming that far out into the wilderness. They have nothing to eat. But he takes care of that because he cares about everything, every part of your life. Next, the Pharisees demand a miraculous sign. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him. Testing him, they demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. When he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I will not give this generation any such sign." So he got back into the boat and left them, and he crossed to the other side of the lake. Demanding a sign, demanding miracles, that's not really, saying, if you are God, you will help me pay my phone bill this month. If you are God, you will heal my cat from that runny eye, or, whatever whatever issue that you might be trying to test him on, it's not right to demand a miracle from him. You can ask and beg, and he can certainly do any miracle that you might ask of him. He's capable of all things, but is he willing? Is it in his will or best for you? Those aren't always things that we have in mind when we're asking, and he always knows. So you have to be prepared for the answer you're going to get. Bug off, you're a bunch of jerks. That's what he said to the Pharisees. The yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. But the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. They only had one loaf of bread with them in the boat. As they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, "Watch out. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod." And as they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread, Jesus knew what they were saying, so he said, "Why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you understand or know yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Do you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterwards?" 12, they said. "And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up?" 7, they said. "Don't you understand yet?" he asked them. Sometimes it seems a little harsh. Well, don't you understand? Don't you have ears? But, maybe it's frustrating because he has been saying it over and over that the Pharisees and the leaders of their day are they require too much of the people. They're hurting the people instead of helping. They're hurting God's cause instead of helping. The yeast of the Pharisees, meaning I think it's talking about I'm not really sure other than the bad things that they require of people. I don't know why it's called yeast or why he refers to it as yeast, although he does say at some point that one bit of yeast can spread through the whole dough and make it rise. But he's really saying, beware, don't let them get into your dough. Don't let their requirements and laws and foolishness affect how you see and treat the people. Jesus heals a blind man. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then, spitting on his eyes, he laid hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" The man looked around. "Yes," he said, "I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and they were opened. The sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." Once again, he says, don't spread the word. Well, it's just like anti-Jesus, now, as we're all commissioned to spread the word, but back then, when he does a miracle, and this is in chapter 8, and he's already a few times said, "Don't tell anyone. Don't go back through that village." Why did he take him out into seclusion? To heal him, It's amazing to me that it was something I've never noticed really before, but I think he just is hoping for more time. It's neat to see that, or hear he didn't know if he was healed fully. It didn't just work the first time. He spit on his fingers, wiped his eyes. He was halfway healed of blindness. I'm sure maybe it's the peopleness, the humanity of Jesus at the time. It's a neat story, though. I see people that look like trees. He fixed it the rest of the way, That's what he'll do. He's a healer. And he does want us to share how he's healed us now. Peter's declaration about Jesus. Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the prophets." Then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Because he knows, He's the Messiah, and they are going to kill him. As soon as they figure out anything about him, they're going to take his life. He's taking their authority, they're going to take his life. And it's very, bold and observant. After, just a couple of stories ago, he's saying, "What, you don't have ears? You can't understand anything?" No, he's, it's a great piece of wisdom for Peter to say, "You're the Messiah." Somebody they've been waiting for hundreds of years, prophesied way back in the early Old Testament. Isaiah talks and lots of prophets talk about the one who's coming to save the nation, and it's him, and Peter declares it, and that's very bold, and that's, I think, part of how Peter's got the faith that enables the first church to be built on his sandals and his shoulders. Jesus predicts his death. Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things. He calls himself the Son of Man. And be rejected by the elders, the leading priests and teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples and then reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. If you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit to gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? Is anyone ashamed of me? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns to glory of his Father with the holy angels." So I guess this is the first time in Mark that he's talking about, he's going to go die, and it's part of his mission. It's part of what he had to do as the sacrificial lamb. He had to go sacrifice or be sacrificed. He sacrificed himself essentially at any moment. Being God, at any moment he could have burst forth, called angels, gotten down from the cross. They say, "Oh, if you're the Son of God," when they're crucifying him, "Oh, if you're the Son of God, get down," or call the angels. Well, he certainly could have, but he chose to suffer and die for us as part of his Father's plan to redeem our pitiful, sinful nature. We choose our way all the time, and he just really hoped we might choose his way. So that's what I'm here to encourage you to do, choose his way, follow his example, unto, the willingness to die for his sake. Whoever gives up their life for his sake will be blessed, but whoever is ashamed of him, you just need to take these stories, these words that Jesus gives us to cling to a new hope, a bright future. Just build your faith on these stories and this the knowledge that he cares about everything, down to your food, down to your shelter. He wants to provide for you. And just let him do that, and it'll be the best life that you could hope for.